So the next speaker is my very good friend and podcast editor extraordinaire, Steve Stewart. Let's welcome to the stage.
Hi, I'm Steve Stewart, and I'm a husband, and I'm a father, and I'm a Christian, and I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and I used to have a podcast, but I now edit podcasts for a living, and I've learned so much in the past 5 years, which qualifies me to be on stage today talking to you about this tonight. So, this is the mathematics behind a good podcast interview. What you don't know is you just did a bunch of math in your head. This is how it works. In the English language, in all language, a lot of words act like math problems. Here's and. I'm Steve Stewart, and I'm a Christian, and I live in St. Louis, and I'm a father. All this stuff, you're doing math in your head. Then I throw this word at you, but. And but takes things away. So now you're like, okay, now I got to do some subtraction here. It's just like when somebody tells you those three precious words, I love you, but. Ugh. Which, kind of like a division symbol. It boils things down to what you're really trying to get at, which now we're, boiling it down by a factor of 10. Okay, now I'm qualified to speak to you, right? That's your brain doing math from people speaking. And math is not easy. When people are throwing facts at you, but, which, I just want the conclusion. What are you trying to tell me, Steve? So, is the answer. Even this eraser, it took all that other garbage from beforehand, which qualified me to be up here to speak to you. Okay, that's kind of important, but it boils down to the answer. Even looks like an equal sign, doesn't it? So, I'm qualified to speak to you today about the mathematics behind a good podcast interview. And that's the math right there, you did it. I gave you like 7 details about myself, my name, where I live, all this stuff, but I had a podcast for a living, so now we're doing subtraction. That's the conclusion, but 0.5 was the answer, and it really is not a lot of value to the listener of a podcast. So we're going to talk about the mathematics behind a podcast, a good podcast interview, because that's what we're looking at, mostly people here doing interviews. That's why I'm here tonight. Now, that was slide number 9, which means this is slide number 10. We're halfway through, so I better start giving you some value. This is actually a better title for my talk. The 7 tips for speaking well and editing your show. I agree, that's a much better title. We're going to use that. Okay, so tip number 1 is a proper introduction. How do you introduce your guest to the show? Hey, tell us about yourself. No! Do not do that! Don't do that. You're supposed to introduce your rock star guest to your audience. That's the first thing. Second one, proper salutation. How do you thank someone for being on your show? Thank you for coming on the show. Do the opposite at the beginning. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being on the show. Simple. Get into the meat of the topic right there. Tip number 3, edit your guests. It's okay to edit your guests. Take out the crutch words. I could say the exact same thing I did when I got up here on stage, but take out the math problems. I'm Steve Stewart. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I used to have a podcast. No and, no math, much easier to explain. You can edit them. Also train yourself. I have crutch words. I have lots of crutches. And I edit a lot of people who have worse crutches than me. It's okay to edit your guests and train yourself not to say things like, kind of, sort of, like, maybe. During the interview, bring up some story. Ask them for a story. This gets into the meat of what you're talking about. One of my clients always asks for the origin story. Great content comes when you ask for stories. Tip number 6, your listener is sitting next to you, figuratively, but think about it that way. Your listener is one person. They are listening to you. Pretend like they're sitting next to you while you're interviewing your guests. And then tip number 7, let your guest know they can pitch whatever it is at the end. You don't want the beginning of the book to say, the interview, he starts saying, oh, and in my book, chapter 2. No, let them talk about their stuff at the end. It makes for a much better interview. Now, I have a lot of people who object to editing content. There's all kinds of reasons. I don't have time. I get it. I don't have the skills. I get it. Most of the time, though, they're like, I want to keep it real. That's a lazy answer. Be great. Don't be lazy. You can edit your guests. It's totally fine to cull this content down to what you want to present to your listener. Get rid of the ands. Get rid of the buts. Get rid of the things you don't need. Give them the so. Give them the solution. So this was the mathematics behind a good podcast interview. Thank you.